Hello, sports fans, or philately fans, or both. Welcome. I'm Eric Spielvogel, Director of Education at the American Philatelic Society, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to tonight's presentation. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a great presentation. Alex Haimann joining us tonight. This is our third of the month of October as we continue to celebrate National Stamp Collecting Month. So this episode, again, is episode 8 of season 2023. Tonight's presentation is a peek behind the scenes of the Clash of Empires. Again, this is Alex Haimann. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. Alex Haimann has never met a stamp or cover he didn't like. Having met him myself this past August at GAS, can tell you that he brings an enormous amount of passion and intensity and curiosity and energy to this hobby. He's a collector of pre-1947 United States stamps in a variety of U.S. and worldwide postal history areas. His primary collecting area, which you'll hear a lot more about tonight, focuses on all aspects of the 1879 Anglo-Zulu War. He started collecting stamps with the encouragement and support of the West Suburban Stamp Club in Plymouth, Michigan. Since its inception in 2008, Alex has also been a major supporter of the Young Philatelic Leaders Fellowship program. He served the American Philatelic Society as the chairman of the board of vice presidents from 2013 to 2016, and as the chair of the campaign for Philately Committee 2016 to 2022. Since joining the society in 1996, Alex has sponsored over 500 new APS members. At present, Alex serves on the council of the Royal Philatelic Society London. Alex lives with his wife and 3 children in St. Louis, Missouri. Before we get to the presentation, let me do a quick bit of house cleaning here. I've heard this before if you've done these. If you're watching the presentation live, your microphone and camera are disabled to optimize bandwidth, and you'll see that why in a minute. To engage fellow attendees, please use either the chat feature or the question box. We'll get to those presentations at the end, at the end of the presentation. If you're watching this later as a recorded video, feel free to ask questions in the comments section. Okay, this program is provided thanks to generous support from APS members. If you're not already a member of the APS, please consider joining us and becoming a part of this 25,000 plus member community of collectors and enthusiasts. If you're still exploring this and would like more information about our services, please visit our website at stamps.org. Alex, the Zoom floor is yours, and I'll get our pieces ready to go.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and welcome to everyone. I see a few names on the attendee list of longtime friends in the stamp collecting world broadly, generally, and I'm appreciative for your support. And lots of names I don't recognize, which is also great. I'm looking forward to taking questions and chatting at the end of the presentation piece here. And then I'm going to now share my screen here. Thank you to I have a friend of mine in the Zulu War historical world that made this Zoom background for me, and I don't get that much chance to use it, but the idea that lots of artifacts, this is not my, I wish this was my actual background in reality, though some of the artifacts if laid out with wood paneling would certainly look like this. So many thanks to my friend. So Clash of Empires, here we go. What you saw was a preview of the real event. It took place from July 1st until July 31st this past summer, as mentioned, in London at the Royal Philatelic Society. The journey to that event, to what happened there, started 8.5 years before, in February of 2015. Some delays, including a global pandemic, kept it, from its original dates of when it was supposed to happen. But my goal here is to just give you a little bit of a view into how that exhibition came to be, and it's really hard to encapsulate the entire story of how it all was put together. There's a feature piece in this month's American Philatelist, the APS magazine and journal, and I direct you to that as well, and look forward to your questions to answer items I don't get to but that are of interest to you if you're on this evening. All right, so how to put this all together. I've divided into 3 different subjects for my presentation, as it were, which is the origins, and really that's about the origins of my interests, but also the origins that lead to the Zulu War, and then sort of the Anglo-Zulu War and being brought together with the Royal Philatelic Society. How did that all come to be? And then some comments of gratitude. The origin of this story it starts in 1997. I was 11 years old, this month, actually, almost to the day of this presentation, is 30 years since I began collecting stamps. So I'm 37 now. So I was 7 years old, and I was a second grade teacher that put some stamps in my hand for a geography lesson, a 20-minute geography lesson, and it changed my life. Stamps and stamp collecting, everything about it has been a part of my life in some form continuously without a break for 30 years. My joke is that, in addition to that experience as a 7-year-old in second grade, the experience I'm about to tell you about in 1997 when I was 11, and meeting my wife when I was 22, those three things have altered the trajectory of my life more than anything else. So in August of 1997, my family visited England. It was the first time that we had traveled overseas. I grew up in the Detroit, Michigan suburbs, and mentioned about the West Suburban Stamp Club. It was my local stamp club where I went and really got into the stamp collecting hobby as a result of the wonderful community in the Detroit, Michigan area. So I was already a stamp collector. That collector gene was already activated, and I walked into a toy soldier shop, which was the gift shop of the Guards Museum near Buckingham Palace. And this picture that you see here is actually like a picture of like less than a quarter of this shop. So there was just rows and rows and rows of cases all the way around showing different scenes. And on that lower level in the center of this picture is where they had a big display of the Zulu War. Now, as an 11-year-old, I knew nothing about this. I was interested in history generally and broadly. They had a scene of Waterloo and World War I and World War II and the U.S. Civil War. And I went around for each of the 6 days we were in London. I returned to the shop, and they kind of adopted me and would talk to me about different parts of the campaigns and different history. And I was fascinated by the Zulu War. I had never heard of it before. I'd never seen famous movies, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that are relevant. And I decided that I wanted to pick one topic to not only collect the toy soldiers of, but also to go home and start collecting the postal history and the stamps and anything I could that was in the philately space related to it. So I picked the Zulu War, and over about a 10-year period, this display is about 10 years later in my childhood room, and that's a lot of lawn mowing and yard work and every odd job you can imagine. Those are all 54 millimeter hand painted toy soldiers, all lead toy soldiers. And I bought, I think I bought 2 Zulus and 1 British at that first visit. And then every opportunity I had, and birthday and so forth, it was the one thing that I really wanted, was to replicate that experience, that diorama that I'd seen. Now, over the course of those 10 years, while I was collecting the toy soldiers and doing this, the one thing I was not able to find, even though that was my original objective when I was there in the toy soldier shop as an 11-year-old philatelist, was any postal or philatelic related items. So when I got back to the United States, I started going to stamp shows and starting to look on eBay, really early eBay time, and trying to find Zulu War covers, letters, things related to the war, and came up with nothing. It was 10 years before someone actually handed me in the palm of my hand a piece of mail sent by a soldier, actually from the campaign itself. And on this next slide, I will show you what that looked like. So the piece of mail, it's just a cover. It doesn't look like much. Anyone on this call that's interested in military postal history or mail sent out of conflict zones, it's pretty plain. It doesn't have a stamp on it. It just has this 6D, which stands for 6 pennies due, hand stamp. It's from Captain Kramer of the 60th Rifles on active service in Zululand, and indicating no stamps available. Sent back to his family in the Isle of Wight in England. So that was like a jolting moment when I finally had someone hand this to me, and it was for sale, and I was fortunate enough to have bought it. And the conversation I had at that time makes all the sense in the world, that I lived in the wrong country, that the collecting base, the dealers, anyone that this was connected to, was really in South Africa and in England. The conflict itself, which we'll talk about a little bit, I'm not going to get into the full history of what this is all about, but basically is a South African military history story of a conflict between the Zulu people and the British primarily. And so that's really, the basis of interest and of the history itself is really in Great Britain and in South Africa. On the right side is a book. It's not very big. It's a pocket-size book. And it's the South African Traveler's Handbook, and it came out in February of 1879. The war began with the British invasion in early January 1879. I apologize for not having a map in this presentation, but if you're thinking about South Africa, we're in the very, very, very far east side of South Africa, just along right basically at the Indian Ocean coast. The Cape Town is on the western side of South Africa. That's really where the Dutch settlement was in the early 1600s, and then the British took over in the early 1800s and continued a migration of European settlers, and other descendants of the Dutch and the British were making their way eastward. And the farthest east in what is now South Africa was the independent Zulu kingdom. When the war broke out, this was rushed to publication, and it's a translation guide or manual of English and Zulu phrases, and it's in that orientation so it could fit in an officer's or a gentleman's pocket. And this actually went into the conflict with a reinvasion force that went in March and April. And I was handed this a couple of years after I started collecting the postal items. I was, finding a couple items a year. It's a very, very limited area, unfortunately, very scarce, very short conflict, and not that much mail survives. And I was a toy soldier collector, and then I refocused myself back in this topic on philately. And when I was handed this book by a dealer friend, and he said, I was like, it's not really for me. I focus on, just the postal piece. And he goes, Alex, this, just like the letters and the covers that you're collecting, this was actually of that time, actually went with an officer into the campaign. It's as real of a connected artifact, a piece of history related to your interest. And I sort of said, that's interesting. He goes, well, if you really want to eventually, kind of collect this in its fullest sense, you should find other artifact categories, other ways of telling the story side by side with your postal interest. And he was obviously trying to sell me on this thing, but it clicked. It all clicked. I worked for the Smithsonian National Postal Museum for 5 years, and I had a lot of opportunity to engage lots of different types of objects that, other than stamps and letters and envelopes, that were part of the broader postal history story of the United States. But the idea that these non-philatelic objects could be part of that, telling that story, already resonated with me, and this was sort of that spark that sent me in another direction. So that was the first postal object and the first non-postal object, aside from modern toy soldiers, that I started collecting. So the story of the Zulu War is vast. Even though it was a conflict that took place just from January to August of 1879, there are easily 1,000 books that have been written about it ever since. The exhibition itself featured 7 different books, new books that were celebrating their publication, related to different aspects and niches of the Anglo-Zulu War, and that was just being published related to the exhibition this past July. 7 new books on different subjects and themes and topics, but again, all related to this narrative, this story, this history. So I'm going to highlight just a few postal objects that were on display in the exhibition to just try to give little tiny bits and pieces of this story. But the bottom line is the British invaded. They wanted to knock out this last independent African kingdom that would stand in the way of creating a one unified sort of body politic, a confederation of Southern Africa, in similar to what Canada had done what had been done in Canada in the 1860s. These are 2 covers, both sent right upon the eve of the invasion. So the one on the left side was sent sent free within the colony from George Wardell of the 24th, first 24th, from Helpmachar, which is right on the British colony side in Natal, before entering Zululand. This one was sent from Lieutenant Anstey, sent to his father also right before the invasion in the first days of January 1879. And they were both part of a central invasion column that made their way. There were 3 columns that made their way into the country. And the central invasion column, about 10 days into the invasion, rests at the foot of this mountain facing towards the Zulu capital. They wanted to sort of figure out where the main Zulu army was, and they were sort of making their way in. And the objective was that all 3 columns could get closer and closer to the Zulu capital and force the Zulu army to fight them. So the British and the central column, including the main commander, stop here at the foot of Isandawana Mountain, and included with George Wardell and Captain and Lieutenant Anstey. And basically, to really take something that is a lot bigger than a lot longer of explanation, but basically they think they find the Zulu army in the early morning hours of the 21st into the in the late 21st into the 22nd of January. They split their force early still when it's dark, and part of the force goes off in sort of in one direction, and leaving still a pretty major force here with their supplies, but the less mobile portion of their force to follow on if they do encounter the Zulu army in the direction that they think the Zulus are in. And in the around 10:30 in the morning on the 22nd of January, a scouting party from this camp goes over a ridge in the opposite direction of where the general had gone with half the force, and spot the 25,000 warrior Zulu army. And at that moment, the Zulus rise up and actually rush over the field and over about a 4-hour period of time, encircle and destroy this camp, as well as killing most of the British soldiers and the colonial civilians that were there. There were some that got away, but it was the single greatest defeat of a British field force in the history of the Victorian Army in a single day. So it's a pretty dramatic moment and devastating to the effort of the British that were in terms of this attempt for creating a sort of a quick solution by going in, defeating the Zulu army, and that being it. So this is there's this photograph. This is the telegram marked his last by his father at the club it was received, but a telegram notifying Lieutenant Anstey's father of his death at Isandlwana. And George Wardell was also killed. So both of those covers that I showed you in the previous slide were just less than 3 weeks later, or about that. Both men would be killed, and right in the spot along the mountain of that picture that I showed you. So it was a very, very dramatic in many, many ways. This is a cover and a letter that was sent inside, sent by Colonel Glynn to another officer in the regiment, Captain Harrison, sent on the 29th of January, so 1 week after the battle. Now there's another battle that takes place, which we'll talk about, called the Battle of Rorke's Drift. And if anyone has seen the movie Zulu, which was the very first film that Michael Caine starred in, and he just announced, I think this week, that he's officially retired from making films. So it's pretty amazing timing of our conversation and exploration here. So the Battle of Rorke's Drift, which I'll talk about in a moment, occurs later in the day on the 22nd. So this is a letter sent by the commander of that central column, writing to another officer. Now, most of their supplies have been destroyed at both the Battle of Isandlwana and the Battle of Rorke's Drift. So he's using very scarce paper that was still in his possession that he was able to come across, and basically is cross-hatching that letter. So writing the letter and then turning it to take maximum advantage. But it really is a dramatic example in terms of the postal item, but also giving a real sense of the tension and the real dangerous moment that the British found themselves in with that massive defeat at the Battle of Isandlwana. And he describes both battles in this one letter, and its date line at the very top, as you can see, 29 January, and then right below it says Rorke's Drift. So a cover and letter from Rorke's Drift, probably the most, or tied for the most famous place or name related to the Zulu War. And then just only a few more items that are related to this. So just to give a sense of the variety, so they got the traditional covers and letters. This is a newspaper that was sent on the 30th. So again, just 8 days after those battles, sent from the colony of Natal, one of the first printed newspapers to talk about the reaction to the battles, the defenses in the colony, because the British colony thought it was possible the Zulus would invade. And this was sent with this 1 penny stamp, Natal stamp, actually to a recipient in England, which is interesting. At the end of the war, there's a reinvasion that is sent, and the British end up defeating the Zulu army and capturing the king, Cetshwayo. This is a letter that was sent into Cape Town Castle in 1882. The king was imprisoned there from late 1879 until 1883, basically. And this was asking, it was a group of Europeans that had visited the king, and the following day they sent this letter and asking if he would sign the letter as a souvenir of their visit, and he does. It's the only English script the king ever learned how to write, was his name, taught to him by the officer in charge of his captivity, his time at the Cape Town Castle, and the only letter known in any form signed by the Zulu king, King Cetshwayo. He is the nephew of King Shaka, the founder and the sort of the principal chief that brings the Zulu people and creates sort of the Zulu nation as it is known today in the early 19th century. So that's a letter by King Cetshwayo. All right. So talking about the Zulu War a little bit more in terms of kind of its interest, its connection. Most people, Americans, Brits, Canadians, or anyone worldwide, the reason that they know about the Zulu War today is a famous movie that came out, basically came out almost exactly 60 years ago. It was filmed in 1963, came out in 1964. It starred Stanley Baker and Sir Michael Caine, though he was not knighted at the time. Here they are in a scene. This is a publicity item that was done for the release of the movie. Well, the real John Chard, played by Stanley Baker, is on the left. That's what he really looked like. He would receive the Victoria Cross from Queen Victoria for his action and leadership there. And then Gonville Bromhead, who's played by Michael Caine. This is a real photograph of him on what he looked like on the right side. And so when I first got into thinking about, and this is in the 10 years ago, when I was thinking about, well, I'd love to display all this and do something to show it to the public, and I had ideas of what I wanted that to look like, I knew that in my interest of wanting to have the philately, but also the non-philately be showed side by side to really excite all potential audiences that might come and see whatever this would be. I didn't have a sense that it'd be a big museum exhibition at that point. I realized how important it was to get some postal objects related to these two famous people, not the actors, but rather the real John Chard and Gonville Bromhead. And I was very fortunate in about many years ago to be able to acquire a letter sent by each of them, not to each other, but to different people. The one on the left is sent by Chard to Sir Lintorn, who is another Royal Engineer officer, and it's sent in May of 1879. So he's sent from the campaign after the Battle of Rorke's Drift, before the reinvasion has taken place, and basically Chard is being a little critical of the pace of this, and how this is not really it's taken much longer than he anticipated, and you want time for us to get this underway. The letter on the left, on the right, is written by Gonville Bromhead. You can see in the top right, it's written from Rorke's Drift, then the 22nd of April, so 3 months to the day of the battle that would make him famous. He's writing to his sister, and in this letter, he makes reference to, we have not seen much of our friends, the Zulus, for some time now. So it was quite something to be able to have the postal artifact, and something that comes up over and over and over again in the story of the exhibition. And we had over 2,000 attendees come from 29 countries in the course of that month. And very few of them were philatelists or people in the stamp collecting world. But to have an opportunity to talk about the postal object, what a letter or an envelope sent by one of these individuals during the campaign itself, what that represents. And it is, in many cases, the category of the most durable, tangible, physical connection to the history. These were written by these men in Zululand, specifically waiting for in different parts of the campaign to continue. But they sat down there, and it was to hold these objects is to hold something that Gonville Bromhead, Victoria Cross recipient, or that John Chard, Victoria Cross recipient, and famous for their actions at the Battle of Rorke's Drift, that they held not later after the war or before they ever got there, but rather from the campaign itself. So I was a big part of the connecting the public that came to the exhibition with trying to understand the importance of postal and philatelic artifacts. And more than half of the artifacts were postal or philatelic in some form of the over 550 artifacts on display. Bringing the history to sort of a more present moment, we're very fortunate to have the support and endorsement and letter of welcome from a Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, probably the most famous at the time living statesman of the Zulu people, but in South African political history as well. At the time, he was 94, and he had was in Nelson Mandela's first government, was a significant minister in KwaZulu-Natal before the first free elections in the 90s, and a significant figure for his traditional role as sort of the traditional prime minister to the Zulu monarch and people, and had that role for near 70 years, 70 years. This is a letter sent by him in one of his ministerial positions in 1988, signed by him. And this is a picture of him at around that time. And this is, again, his signature at the centenary events that took place in 1979, and along with the South African stamps and souvenir sheet that was issued on the first day cover. The photograph on the right is a picture of him from 1963. He played his own great-grandfather, the Zulu king, King Cetshwayo, in the movie Zulu. So one of the principal figures of the whole Zulu War story, which is King Cetshwayo, played by his own great-grandson, who in 1963 was still a significant figure, but would go on in his traditional and political and public life to really make a tremendous impact for the Zulu people. And we were fortunate to have his support. So we had a letter of welcome from him in the exhibition catalog as well. And there was a video welcome that he did for our opening ceremony. It's on the YouTube channel that I put in the comments here. So if you'd like to see his 2-minute welcome. With great sadness, just a few weeks ago at the age of 95, Prince Buthelezi passed away. Again, 95. It wasn't surprising, but it's still a shock because of his towering presence for the Zulu people for such a long time. And we're so very grateful to him for his support, but also it's really one of the last things that he did in a major public way was to support the exhibition and providing varying elements for us to have there in London this past July. So moving on to gratitude is really the only way I can frame the exhibition itself. There are so many people that provided so much support for us. And I could give a whole other hour-long discussion about all the people that comes together. But anyone on the call or anyone on that's listening in, if you've ever written a book on any topic, philatelic, postal, whatever it may be, there are so many people that are often of assistance, critical assistance in your effort to write a book, whether it be your editor, a graphic designer, your publisher, the printer, and contributors, people that help provide you images or other information that you need. Well, we wrote, along with several contributors, a 372-page book while simultaneously coordinating a physical experience that would, of course, be open to the public. So imagine if you've written a book before, imagine having to simultaneously in tandem, so they're all happening at the same moment, and it's all coming together and being published at the same moment, having every image be a real physical thing that you have to also display live for an audience. And that was really the challenge that we had in front of us. And really what the part that took so long is that it's a balancing act of many different pieces. It's not just writing a book and making sure that text is good. It's writing a book while simultaneously getting captions and objects prepared, mounted, organized in terms of the order they're going to appear, scaling into cases that we're going to have. We had 14 2-meter tall cases. Really there at that point, it leads to an army of sorts that puts it all together. These are just a montage of photographs of varying people that helped us in so many different ways. So to put an exhibition on like this, it's a multifaceted challenge because it's a physical space. So in the way that a stamp show gets together, like Great American Stamp Show, lots of different pieces and dealers coming from all over and exhibitors bringing exhibits and frames and the APS bringing a truck of other pieces and equipment and booth pieces. Well, for us, that was what we were doing as well, getting all these pieces assembled into one place. But instead of something being open for 4 days, it had over 30 days open to the public. And so the staffing and the volunteers is a whole other component. But for the setup, it was about a series of volunteers for the museum. We were very fortunate to have some interns as well as volunteers local in London. There's a picture here of 2 pictures of Jay Bagalki, the editor of the Scott Catalog, who volunteered his time to man all of the photography, scanning, imaging of as I said, over 550 artifacts. And scanning 2-dimensional postal and philatelic objects is one thing, but photographing 4 5-foot tall Zulu period shields and other metal objects and beadwork and everything. I have a co-curator who you saw in the video, Mr. Ian Knight, who's written over 40 books over a 40+ year career as a professional historian of the Zulu War. We had model makers down here with with our two friends that put together the two major dioramas we had in the center of the entire exhibition gallery, and so much more. So in the end, it allowed us to put together something that really has never been done, hosted by in the philatelic postal space, which is the true gathering of an artifact-driven exhibition where the goal was to have as many artifacts as possible to tell as many parts of the story, the broad story, and we put them into what we call chapters, or 15 chapters that tell this story, and there's lots of ins and outs and pieces, and happy to answer questions. There are many videos on the YouTube channel that I would direct you to that would be helpful to sort of give you a sense of what was here. I'm not going to go through any more of the artifacts, just that time doesn't allow. There is a video on there of my going through and spending about an hour sort of object-led, and I know there's some people that are attendees on this meeting that listened in live when I did that in July. Thank you for joining in again. But the idea was to really wow, that we wanted people to come in that had never thought in particular about the postal and philatelic object before, and to see that that is the primary artifact category that connected every single chapter, every single part of the story. The postal piece and the philatelic piece really was the guide. Again, it is the most attributable artifact, that these letters being written sent from this very particular moment, that the cancellation mark dates everything. Even these shields, the shields are all attributable to a specific regiment that fought in the Zulu War, but exactly what date it was made, we don't know. Exactly the exact place where it was used, we have an idea, very, very close idea for these regimental shields, but not precisely, not the way that a pen and ink letter and a canceled stamp on an envelope or a postmark provides. And so that was really the core element of our experience. So just to give a few photographs, we're very, very fortunate, again, to have a very large attendee base. Gus and Diane Clark are seen here in the center. Diane's looking straight at the camera. They were two of our donors. Those two joined many other and primarily American donors. My thanks to Josh Buxbayev and the Buxbayev family. They are the owners and operators of Cherry Stone Philatelic Auctions. They were our primary sponsor, donating over $30,000 to really give us the initial boost and investment to go buy the cases and get some of the initial pieces that required long lead times going. Scott Treppel and the team at Siegel Auctions, as well as Skylar Rumsey and the team at Rumsey Auctions, were also sponsors of the event, and very thankful to them, as well as many others from Don Sunman and Steve Walski and Ann Duncan and others that, long list, which is on the website and in the YouTube video. If you go watch the rest of that 20-minute film, there at the end as well. So my thanks to all of you and every sponsor of the event. We met some very interesting people. As I said, people came from all over the world. We had 29 different countries represented in all habited continents, from South Africa and to South America and Asia and all over. Probably one of my favorite photographs is someone came to the opening and he showed us his Zulu shield with Napkiri Club and Ikwa stabbing spear tattoo, which was really just stunning, real commitment. And he was there on the very first day that it was open to the public. Loved that. We had someone that flew from Singapore for 2 days to come to the exhibition, someone that came from Amman, Jordan, and brought his wife to come see the exhibition for a day. So really amazing, the passion and excitement. And it's not a surprise to anyone that's listening here, because the passion that we have as stamp collectors and philatelists isn't any different than this passion, but it's every single collecting world, every single area of interest and history, has this greatly passionate, engaged audience, and really, really interesting to meet them and to have everyone, be there to engage. This is a picture of the gift shop. No museum exhibition is complete, and this was the very first museum exhibition open to the public in this form that the Royal Philatelic Society London in 154-year history had ever put together. And so we just like you're at Disney World or at the museum, you can't exit the exhibition without going through the gift shop. So we put together a whole gift shop experience. I mentioned 7 different books, the exhibition catalog for sale, but also toy soldiers, other books, prints, and a Zulu beadwork. So we had a lot of different pieces, because again, it was about sharing this history and giving everyone an opportunity to go away with something to continue that sort of tactile, physical connection to the interest that they may not have had as much of when they walked through the doors, and here they are. As I mentioned, we put together an exhibition catalog. So here it is, and this is what you see there is the hardcover version, and in the version here, I have the softcover version. Both of these are available through the Royal Philatelic Society London website. I'll post the link in a moment. But again, in support of the exhibition and the Royal, they are available still for sale. So the goal here was to, and it's what took so much effort, was to have every single object, every single artifact that was on display in the exhibition be in the exhibition catalog in this narrative order. There's nothing I despise more than going to a museum exhibition that I love, and there's some particular object that I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I would love to get an image of that, and I go to the gift shop and open up the exhibition catalog to make sure that the object that I really thought was so cool was there along with everything else. And it's not. And the exhibition catalog just features a selected range of artifacts. And so and the goal for 8.5 years was, no, we're going to have every artifact displayed in order of this narrative, so that if someone comes to the exhibition, that they could walk away really having as all of everything they saw, in one place, and easy to follow. We had reenactors come to the exhibition and do some incredible displays and talks. As I mentioned, we had an opening event which welcomed people from all over the world, which was great, including a large group of Americans that came, friends from Zululand, traditional Zululand that came, and elsewhere. So really excited for that, for having that. We ran a symposium, a 4-day symposium with 31 speakers coming from 4 different countries. And we had 450 people come through across those 4 days, between the symposium and the exhibition, just amazing. And it really was a way of thinking about philately, postal history, and the context, what we call context philately. All of the other subject matter that connects this history of why the philately is so interesting is because the history and culture that's connected to the Zulu War and all the interesting facets. So we invited postal, philatelic, non-philatelic, non-postal historians and collectors from all different walks of life and backgrounds to come and present. And we did a screening of the film Zulu, of course, and a discussion afterwards with experts on the film. So this is Neil Aspenshaw talking about the Martini Henry rifle. There's actually one kind of behind me in this Zoom background. And we did there was one of our YouTube partners put together a video of Neil's at the exhibition, and it has over 375,000 views since July. It's a pretty remarkable number. Our overall, we have over 700,000 views on our YouTube content created in and around and focused on the exhibition. So we're very pleased with the take up again of this massive audience that this exhibition created, well beyond the physical premise of the gallery itself. Another really fun presentation was the reenactors. Even now I'm sort of, showing you a Zoom and we're talking virtually, but, what's better to talk about, the ins and outs of British uniform and kit of 1879 period than having people dressed up in that kit and physically having the presence of the person versus it being just on a screen. So there was a narrator through this portion of the discussion and talking about they would have that person step forward based on which part of the kit and which type of soldier and officer they were describing, and the person would sort of hold their arm up and take the helmet off and here's the rifle, and so it was really something about trying to make this more real. Take what we do as collectors, take what we do as interested in our subject matter and make it more alive. And that was really certainly true in many parts of the exhibition. We had Zulu Shield biscuits that we gave out at the symposium. We had an artist in residence, Ethan Burkett, who was drawing different things that he saw in the gallery throughout the period of the exhibition. So again, all the different ways to engage lots of different types of people at different backgrounds and experience. That was our objective. My son, who's the second closest to the front of this image here, these are 3 other brothers of guests, attendees of the exhibition, of course, loved the toy soldiers, which is what drew me into all of this. And so we made sure there were, of course, toy soldiers available in the gift shop and available for anyone there to let another spark of another collection or an interest in history continue on. And with that, my final piece of gratitude before we open this up for questions is to my family. There is no doubt that without my wife, Sarah, and her tremendous generosity in allowing me the time to put this together. From the 2 years leading up to the exhibition, 2021 to 2023, I had over 10 trips to the UK, a massive amount of time spent on the ground, and coordinating all of this, time spent in South Africa in years past, also working towards this exhibition. And she was a saint upon saint to be there for. I was there for 50 days, 50 days, and she was there for 40 days with our 3 children. My oldest, Corinne, who's in the pink in the center, my son, Winston, who's in the front, so 8, 5, and then our youngest is a 2-year-old, Georgie. Winston and Georgie had their birthdays, their 5th and 2nd birthdays in London this summer. So, really an experience of a lifetime, and an opportunity to test what philately and postal history can do in terms of bringing our subject matter to the public and showing it in context with so much other history and other artifacts, and making what we do as collectors really possible in terms of making it well beyond just the 2-dimensional way we display so much of our material in the present day, and a lot of the shows and exhibitions that we do now. So anyway, I'll put it to you, Eric, and we'll go from there, and I'll take questions, and we'd love to hear from people.
Alex, that is the sheer scale and richness of this is something else. I love that one of the little people just showed up here.
he heard Zulu toy soldiers, and he like immediately opened the door. So
did he also see his picture in the exhibit hall?
He walked in, he sees it on the screen here. Yes.
It's very much like the Harry Potter invisibility cloak. They just kind of come out of nowhere, just like the book you were trying to show, the exhibit guide. This is I can see where it would be really, really, really difficult to speak about this in any less than a couple hours. So yes. I know how much you flew through this. We have a lot of questions coming in. Great. I've got a couple of my own too. I'm a fan of history, and my dad is a professor of Third Reich, Nazi, and fascism history, which continues to be extraordinarily compelling. And there are new books written on it all the time, and I'm always fascinated by that. Can you, as a person who has really dug into this, talk about why this is such a compelling topic? I mean, given all the resources that went into this, and the scale of the exhibition, and the scale of the artifacts, and I'm sure some cooperation that was really challenging as well. Why does this galvanize so much energy?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, why are people so interested in this? And it's a great question. So there are a million different answers to that, but the best answers I can give you are 2. Number 1 is the Battle of Isandlwana. Because the British were defeated by an army that didn't have a written language and didn't sit around there for a week afterwards, like after Waterloo or any sort of European conflict of the 19th century, and say, well, at this time this happened there, and here's who we found over here, and here's what time our army moved in this direction. They ransacked the camp, they destroyed what they perceived as, again, their enemy, and then they left. And so for over 140 years, there has been this mystery about Isandlwana, what happened when. And the battlefield is massive. It's a multi-mile long battlefield with many, many components to it. If you're interested in at any point visiting the Zulu War battlefields, again, I'll post an email address, which is the exhibition's email address. So if you want to, and it's in the American Philatelist article as well, be happy to help, direct you to how you can best go down to South Africa and do that. But it's an amazing experience, and it has intrigued historians ever since. What happened? Why did it go so wrong? Sort of like the way that, but not equivalent in many ways, but sort of how like the Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, kind of has this outsized interest in American Western military history. The second reason is the movie Zulu. I mean, really, that movie in 1964, there was lots of books being written before and everything, but the modern massive push of interest is all related to the popularity of that film. It's still shown in the UK on television every year. It's drawn an immense amount of interest, and it's a film that that I think it's misunderstood. It's well enjoyed, but also misunderstood in so many ways. It came out at a time, in the 60s, a time of great change in not only in England and the United States, all over, and it's not a typical rah-rah film where just the British redcoats arrive and they win the day. And at Rorke's Drift, 140 British soldiers held out against 3,500 British warriors for over 12 hours. And so in the one day where you had this great defeat of a British field force and within 24 hours period of time, they also had their greatest underdog victory. And so this narrative on the 22nd of January 1879 continues to play into this lore, and lots of Victoria Crosses were awarded to participants at that battle. And so the movie plus the lore of these two battles, juxtaposed to each other, is a big part of it. So that's the in brief answer. But we think in philately that we're the only field that has this sort of passion and interest and engagement. Well, for every 1,000 stamp collectors, there's 1,000 people that are interested in in some other area, whether it be military history. I mean, there's a Facebook page that's just people interested in the Martini Henry rifle, the primary rifle used in the Zulu War, and it has, I think, near 10,000 members of that Facebook group. So it's kind of amazing to think about, again, all these niches and areas of history, but the Zulu War brings a lot of them together into one.
Well, that's a nice segue into one of the questions. Carl Barna asks, is that rifle yours? And how did you get it? Or if it's not yours, how did you get it in it?
Yeah, Carl, thank you for asking. So no, the objects behind me, actually, if anything, are just meant to give you kind of like a bit of a taste of artifacts. But I have a collection of Martini Henry rifles and related. The one thing about the Zulu War is I'm interested in the lead up elements to it, what happened during it, and everything that happened afterwards. And so Martini Henry rifle, there was one type that was used, but there's a type before it and two that follow it. So I'm interested in all the variations. And so no, that's just a graphic image of a Martini Henry rifle. Anyway, that's the answer to the question about the rifle.
Since we're on the subject of artifacts, here's another one. This is from Rick Howell. He says, Alex, great presentation on an amazing subject. I'm sure everyone in this in the Zoom room can confer. Question is there any particular artifact, sounds like it's going to be a tough question for you to answer, which gave you goosebumps to see it in real life?
The answer is there were many objects that I felt goosebumps when I first got connected with them. I would say that when I first acquired the letter that was signed by the Zulu King, I mean, again, having just something that was held by him, King Cetshwayo, at any point in his life, and it was attributable to him, was really dramatic and really that goosebump element. But there are many other objects. I mean, just the search, the hunt for items. I have some shields that were brought back by different British officers, and having a chance to have those with something that was attributable was really something. I would love to give a whole, if I'm invited back, I could give one just on sort of the top 10 objects and the stories, because the one story that's very hard to describe or explain, except when you're talking to a group of collectors, no matter what you collect, this is a collecting story. I mean, I started off in 1997 and I had 3 toy soldiers, and it was like, how do I go out and actually acquire? And part of that, and the thing in philately we don't think about is because most philatelists and most people in any collecting field don't stay in their area, and that's what they collect. And so I'm interested in collecting stamps and covers, and that's my world. But my goal was to try to find every single possible outlet, every single collecting category that would have material that could be connected to this story in any way. So that led me into the tribal art space. It led me to going to Zululand, traditional Zululand, and buying current cultural objects, and from spoons to milk pails, from Zulus living there today. Beadwork, in the auction space. Interestingly, some of the best philatelic and postal artifacts that I have that then were in the exhibition did not come from the traditional philatelic market. They didn't come, not from a stamp auction house or a stamp or philatelic dealer. They came from the militaria space or the antique collecting world. So, or directly from descendants. So again, had never been in the market before. So I have some items that had never been displayed before, including some material from John Chard's family. John Chard actually was a stamp collector. Again, the guy from Rorke's Drift, played by Stanley Baker. There's a great stamp collecting story related to him. So having that type of item was great.
So to follow that up, now were there any artifacts that you didn't get that given that you kind of approach this as a human concept map where every possible concept connected to this is where you're going to start looking for artifacts? Are there any that you didn't end up with, which you're still like, only we could have gotten this one? I mean, it looks like you got everything. It's hard to imagine you didn't.
That's a great question. Some things were hard to display. So I have them, but I just weren't able to display like a flag that flew on a British fort after the war. I'm in love with traditional Zulu craft work, beadwork, basketry, pottery, and it's just beautiful. It's stunning, and it's such an amazing connection to the Zulu people from historically, as well as items and objects that are made today by Zulu craftswomen and craftsmen. And that's a very good question. I have to think more about that. I would just say more of everything. I mean, in some respects, every artifact tells a slightly different part of the story. It invokes a slightly different reaction from an attendee. So I, couldn't have enough. But had items related to the design of the stamps that came out in the 20th century and early 21st century, which was great. So even a connection to the traditional philatelic, the stamp design piece of the story, which I was very interested in. But I would say there's one object that got away. I know who owns it. The sword that was carried by General Chelmsford is out there. It's owned by a different collector. There's some military medals. And I actually have an answer to that previous question. I owned the journals and letters sent to Captain Harrison, that envelope and that letter that I showed with the cross hatching. A couple of years after I acquired that from the family, his military campaign medal, which had been separated decades before by the family, came up for auction. So I had the opportunity to reunite the campaign medal that he was awarded when he returned back from South Africa with his daily field journals and all these letters, and I was able to do that. So that probably was the most goosebump kind of like, wow, what an amazing opportunity to bring this all back together, and then of course to have it on display at the Royal.
Wow. It's again, the scale of this is so hard. It's I could see where we could go off on a bunch of tangents really easily. And you said at the beginning you're willing to go a little long.
Please.
I appreciate that. We'll probably have a few more questions and try to wrap up in about 10 minutes or so.
Love it.
The next question comes from Carl Barna, who wants to know, what is your educational background? How did you end?
Yeah, no, thank you. So I'm
Geography.
So I born and reared in the Detroit area of Michigan, which I mentioned. I went to George Washington University in DC, and I was a political science major pre-law, very interested in sort of history, of course, but I was thinking I would go to law school, and then ended up working for the Smithsonian National Postal Museum, which I mentioned, for 5 years. And that experience gave me kind of a lived experience in terms of a hands-on of a chance to see artifacts of all different types, objects in different categories, again, all tied to the postal history story. But that was what kind of got me into this experience of sort of understanding how artifacts together in many different categories could tell a single story. And then, but I have no traditional training or educational experience. And I would say that there is no educational, in terms of traditional, like academic educational space, that could possibly give you the background needed here. So I would say the better way to answer your question is I have an educational background in on the ground and hands-on. Talking about, again, from time on the ground in South Africa to, I've been to dozens, maybe nearing over 100 different events in different collecting categories to touch and connect with and physically examine different types of artifacts to understand what I was looking at, how to evaluate this material, not just to buy it or collect it, but to really understand how it, what it is historically, and to understand how to tell the difference between authentic material and not material, and so forth. So it's been quite an experience.
Cool. I'm guessing that if we had done a survey on this one, people might have thought your brain also kind of works as a journalist, and you're kind of following all these different leads and trying to tell the story. But political science and history certainly weigh in there. Yeah. Richard Sola asks this question. He's a wonderful presentation about what historians refer to as historiography. Use several examples of primary sources, artifacts, etc. Any suggestions for the introductory resources that help non-professional historians to learn more about the way historians think, language, and how that collaboration goes? Does that make
that makes sense. It's a great question. My best answer to it is that I don't know off the top of my head what I'd recommend. What I would say is that if you're not a professional historian, but you're interested in this space, the best thing to do is try to connect with in any way with someone that either related to a museum or is writing about your area of interest or history, or the area of history you're interested in learning more about. And try to just ask questions, ask them how they learned. And my answer to that is around a combination of books and again, meeting historians and people in this space, but a lot of dealers, auction houses, trying to learn how to really evaluate this material. So it was about asking a lot of questions, but not in a pedagogical sort of way. I'm not sure I have a good answer to sort of what I would recommend, like the first book that you should read to sort of try to understand how to explore history in this particular way. But great question.
Are there any plans to show this exhibit in the US? This is a question from Gary Withrow.
Thanks, Gary. The answer is, at this time, probably not. There really is not an American connection to the story. So it's a little bit, though interestingly, there's a huge interest base for the Zulu War and Victorian military history in general in the United States. We're a big country. So wherever we have the exhibition, it would be a real effort for whoever to get to it in the US. I'm right now in early stages of discussing a follow-on exhibition that would take place in the UK with another institution, but again, with this sort of still bringing the postal philatelic artifact into the mix, and along with these other types of artifact categories, and to do an even bigger event. So we'll see what comes of that. But it was a very interesting series of follow-on discussions that are taking place right now. I'm actually leaving this Friday to go back to the UK to have the next round of meetings with these other institutions to figure out what that might look like. And so no to the US for now, but thank you. Just the question, it means that there will be some interest in it. There are some big collecting events that take place in the United States in the military history space. There's a big one that takes place in Louisville, Kentucky, that draws thousands and thousands of people every year. It's just a 2-3 day event. And there's another big one that takes place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The one in Oklahoma it's in an 11-acre space that has 6,000 tables at it. So it's mostly a buying and selling show. But I have thought that having just a spot of that experience would certainly give you the audience all in one place, and would even draw additional audience if it was promoted. So co-locating the exhibition is definitely on my mind. I see this next question from David asking, what about an exhibition in South Africa? Funny enough, that is also a discussion underway as well. I'm in actually 2 months from today, I arrive in South Africa for some meetings on this subject around what we might do in South Africa. That's a little bit more of a kind of early stages, not quite sure quite yet what that will look like. But in the end, the physicalness, seeing the live artifacts, there's nothing like seeing the real thing. I mean, and watching the video, which I hope everyone will have a chance to watch after this, it's certainly, that's the way to connect with the objects now that the exhibition is closed. And so 700,000 views on our material, on the views on YouTube, is a larger audience than I could ever hope to have, no matter where a future exhibition would ever be. So in a sense, we succeeded by having a professional graphic designer, professional videographer. It's a first for any major philatelic outing in any exhibition forum, stamp show, et cetera. Even near 2016 had, professional graphic designer, we didn't have a professional videographer. So the bringing all of this creative sort of talent to be able to show in all the different ways this material, so that it would have a life beyond, and we could reach far more audience, far more people than we ever could live. So we'll see. So US, yes, we have go to our website, theclashofempires.org. There's a newsletter you can sign up for, which will include updates of future outings. And yeah, so anyway, that's my best answer there.
I kind of love this question. This is Gary's follow-up question, which is, it almost sounds like he's incredulous that you're not, where are you currently employed is the question, which almost sounds to me, it's like, why aren't you why aren't you a museum exhibitor? Right?
Yeah.
We'll do like one or two more questions.
Sure. Yeah, no,
And I
I
have about
appreciate that.
10, so we won't even get
Sure,
to
great.
that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, oh, that 10's good. I'll go. I'll do lightning. We'll do a
so
lightning round, like the lightning round at the end of the interview. I just put my email, by the way, clashofempires2023 @gmail.com in the chat. I invite anyone to please email me. I'd love to continue on. The number one thing I want to say here is that the American Philatelic Society, which of course is hosting StampChat, has been the greatest inspiration to me because it has kept me kind of grounded that there are so many different types of people, so many different types of interests just in the stamp collecting world. And the idea here is that we want to share the passion and the love that we have for our material, no matter whether it's what we collect, specifically or broadly. And my objective was to try to bring philately and postal history to a much bigger and broader audience. Again, from hundreds of thousands of people that are engaging with this material on YouTube to the physical 2,000+ people that came in person, the books that we've sold now around the world. So that was my kind of the fire that was driving me. So from an employment perspective, I work for a company called Less Annoying CRM. We make a customer relationship manager, Less Annoying CRM for small businesses. I've been working with them for almost 10 years. So I work outside of the museum space, outside of the philately space. I do this as a passion. The answer to the question that no one has asked is, yes, I have found the 25th hour in the day. So yes, I have that job. I actually work a second job in another field as a part-time thing, and then I was working on this basically as a full-time job for 2021 through 2023. I took a sabbatical from my job to allow me to come and be in London. I was at the exhibition every single day, 2 weeks of setup, and then for a whole month. So it's the most intense. This year has been by far the most intense year I can imagine related to my hobby and passion. But really, I think philately has so much to offer the world in terms of connecting anyone, anywhere, of any age, any background, with the history, heritage, and culture of not only their own people, place, whatever they connect to, however they affiliate, but also to show people in any place other people and elsewhere and other people's history that they may never engage with. They may never visit South Africa, they may never visit England, but to understand a story of someone else that's not you, of the other. So I'm not finished with this passion. I've got this. There's an evolution here to sort of take this concept and do more with it, to find other ways to bring philately plus, in this case, military post history together, and to find other themes and to build on this. So this is not the last outing. I pray or hope that we'll have of this, bringing philately to big, broad audiences and showing the world what stamp collecting and philately and postal history has to offer.
Man, you just threw so many concepts in that last answer. I think you just set up another whole talk. But I want to do two more questions if that's
Please.
okay. There's
Great.
one in the queue, but I'm really curious. You talked about the word context philately, which I take to mean artifacts, real artifacts and philately kind of combined. Is this a really unique? Obviously, the scale of it's unique, but is this a shift in exhibiting or a real intent to bring the realism of objects and philately together?
So we should have. So yes, we should do another. We can do it next season, whatever. We should have another conversation and on context philately in particular. And I'll bring some other examples unrelated to the Zulu War. Just this premise of what is context philately. Context philately is the way someone studies, the way someone enjoys, the way someone collects, the way someone exhibits. It's big and broad without guardrails or parameters of exactly how it needs to be enjoyed or done, but rather it is, in brief, using philately, whether it be the study of philately, philatelic objects, postal history objects, to better understand the history or the functioning of something else, the culture of something else. So, for example, if you really want to understand commerce in the early 20th century in the Western United States, be using postal objects, letters, telegrams, anything related to that would be what we considered philatelic or postal history objects, but to use how they were sent and how they were received and what was being written as a way of deepening your understanding of the history that's not related to philately, or vice versa, using let's say in the Zulu War example, using greater understanding of Zulu culture, Zulu history, and the context of what led up to this war to better understand the philatelic and postal artifacts that you could collect or study. So it's the using the context broadly, non-philatelic, to better understand the study, collecting, exhibiting, whatever it may be. It's not thematic collecting, thematic exhibiting, which is a whole category of collecting and exhibiting in the philatelic and postal world. It's beyond that. It's thematic is about, yes, it's about displaying a subject, cats, dogs, eyeglasses, but through stamps and postal objects but it's basically telling that story, but using these objects to illustrate it. This is different. This would be like understanding the history of eyeglasses, but by looking at postal objects related to the correspondence of eyeglass lens companies and optometrists and how they're talking to patients through these postal objects, while simultaneously trying to understand broader context of the ophthalmic lens development, if that makes sense. So it's the context that philately can offer other fields and what other fields can offer philately. As I said, a whole other APS stamp talk to come, but I think it has the opportunity of bringing in non-philatelists into philately by showing them kind of what philately and postal history has to offer them to understand the fields that are interest to them previously.
That is a really beautifully broad and specific wrap up of, and it really kind of captures, I think, the spirit of stamp collecting month and all kinds of stamp collecting. I know in November that we work with the numismatists, and we're kind of bridging coin collecting and stamp collecting. And so, collecting in general is represented in a lot of different ways. I want to put pins in the rest of the questions at this point and leave those for the next time. I'm dying to ask you one last question, then we'll wrap this up. You said that you hand painted. I love that you started this with the little figures, and that you hand painted all of them. Which ones were tougher?
No. I need to be clear. I bought them. They were hand painted. They are hand painted 54 millimeter toy soldiers. I don't want to take credit for what is absolutely not my own skill. It's a skill I've never been able to pick up, though. Funny enough, yesterday with my 5-year-old son, we were beginning to get into like making toy soldiers that plastic ones that you would actually paint. So it may be something I do in the future, but sorry. So I didn't, if your question was leading to sort of how did that part of this kick off, I can't help.
That's all right. I misunderstood that. I was going to ask you which ones were harder to paint, but we'll have to ask someone else that the next time.
Yeah. But I would say that the number one thing I would want to leave with everyone here is that whatever your interest is, whatever your passion is, you don't have to go crazy in a sense the way that I did here. But I would say that whatever you collect, whether it be stamps, just a stamp category, a certain country, a certain theme, whether you collect covers or a postal history area, allow yourself to find a way to experience that theme or topic outside of philately. So if you collect the stamps of a certain country, go find the people that live in that country, go find that country's food, or go visit that place if you've never been there. Find ways, if you're collecting in a thematic area, to experience that theme or to collect the actual object of that theme. So I mentioned eyeglasses. Well, maybe go find a pair of antique eyeglasses and collect them, buy them, just have one example. I learned so much more, in my appreciation and passion for the philately related to this area of British Southern Africa and military history and Zulu history was exponentially improved, exponentially increased by starting to engage the non-philatelic, non-postal artifacts from a collecting and study perspective. So I consider myself even a deeper philatelist because of my ability to now look at many different categories of artifacts with that experience. And it gives me that much more excitement when I'm looking at any particular, back to your original comment, the very first thing you said about me, I've never met a stamp or cover that I didn't like, and that remains true. And it's because I now think about, no matter what I'm holding, I now start thinking about all the context elements. Wow, this cover's from 1950 and sent to this place. Like, I wonder what that place is like. And I wonder what other ways you could explore this story, even if otherwise I would know nothing about it. So that's the beauty of philately. And it's the APS since 1886 has been about bringing people together to enjoy that passion and that collecting interest. And I'm so thrilled to be a part of it, to be a life member of the APS, and thrilled to anyone on here that wants to talk more about the APS. Again, it's Clash of Empires 2023 at gmail.com. Love to speak with you about your collecting area or passion. And thank you so very much, Eric, and to the APS for inviting me to be a part of this, and to share. Also to Susanna for as the editor of the AP American Philatelist, for having the article in the October issue and about the exhibition. Just thrilled to share this with the world.
Alex, we're really thankful for your time and your energy in trying to summate this this multi-year experience, multi-decade experience of yours into one night. So we'll do some more. It does strike me that there's kind of a punk philatelist version of this. It's like, here's the stamp, go find the thing. So we'll bridge that later too.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, and this is just to call an example. Anyone that ever collected an advertising cover that shows something on it, go collect the real thing.
Right.
I mean, so, and on a future talk, that's my teaser for our future talk. I'll show examples where I collect the cover, and then what's actually illustrated on the cover, I actually collect the real thing.
That's a perfect setup.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again. Thank you for all the participants for sticking with us. This was a really fantastic talk with a lot of richness and a lot of other areas to explore. I want to thank the sponsors of StampChat's APS sponsors for continuing this program. Scott, for your moderation and your help with this program. And again, to Alex, I'm going to put a pitch in very quickly for next week's StampChat. That will be episode 9, if I'm counting correctly tonight, for a change. That's Stamp Collecting 101 Part 2. So we get in a little more in depth there. That's next Tuesday night. And then the following week, we have Ron Bresnay with Walpurgisnacht, which is German for Witches' Night. So we've got 2 more coming, and we look forward to having you with us. Thanks again for the sponsors, to everyone involved tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week.